not just a deep dive, it's the deepest dive into Minnesota Vikings football.
How about that? The week one meat and potatoes. We are going to break this down. You think that you know football? It is Judd, AJ, Forno. Of course, he does a great job. A to Z Sports covers the Vikings, his own Vikings First and Skol channel, and his work with us here at Score North. We are going to get into and I'm telling you this, the weeds of what the Vikings did on Sunday in their convincing win against the Giants. But before we do that, a quick shout out to the exclusive personal injury law firm of Purple Daily. That, of course, is our friends at Nicolay Law. Nicolay Law knows that when your loved one gets injured, ordinary life, it can come to a stop and things can get complicated. During that time, insurance companies are likely to pressure you. They don't care if you get better. They don't care if your bills are piling up. They don't care that you may not be able to work. But you know who does? Russ and his team at Nicolay Law. They have seen every play the insurance companies have, and they will go to make sure that you get the compensation that you deserve after an accident. So if you've been injured, get Minnesota's local award-winning injury lawyers. Get Nicolay. Start your path to winning at nicolaylaw.com. That's NICOLET law.com, or give them a call, 1-855-NICOLAY. Russ right there, walking around US Bank Stadium, which is going to be filled on Sunday, as of course the Vikings in week 2 will take on the San Francisco 49ers, defending NFC North champions. But before we get to that, Mr. Forness, I want to rewind to Vikings-Giants. And that game, I'm not joking, had barely come to an end, and I get a text from Forno, because I asked him like a month ago, hey, send me your thoughts. He didn't just send me his thoughts. He sent me 2 primary thoughts. The first one, what I think that we can safely call a NASCAR package on steroids. Vikings getting pressure without, they didn't have to blitz necessarily, but they did employ not 1, not 2, not 3, 4 edge rushers to apply pressure. Your thoughts on what is another invention of the Brian Flores mad scientist scheme? Your thoughts on the sustainability of that package, and does it lose its threat at all because it's now been put on film?
So I actually talked about this a lot on the Real Forno show, which I actually just finished recording right before we got on here. So I'm ready to go, baby. One of the things that's interesting about the Vikings running this, and I think this is key because it's all about personnel. What personnel you have matters a lot when it comes to running certain packages. If you have really good pass catching and blocking tight ends, it makes a lot of sense to run more 12 personnel because you can take advantage of linebackers and safeties. If you have 3 really good wide receivers, you're going to want to run a lot of 11 personnel. And when you have edge rushers who have unique skill sets and builds, you can run this. I believe it's called a Hawk package. Okay. So the 4 edge rusher package is really intriguing. It's something I talked about a lot, especially because of Jonathan Grenard. Grenard has 35.5-inch arms, and that arm length is a weapon. And you talk about anybody in boxing, MMA, or like offensive line coaches, there's a reason why they target players with arm length if they can. It gives you an inherent advantage whenever you are in the trenches, whenever you are in a fight. And because it gives you that advantage, then you can compile all these other skill sets and all these other abilities around that length, because that length just gives you a natural advantage over somebody else. It's not everything, but it does matter in terms of helping you take advantage of other people. All right. In these situations. So if Grenard has 2.5 inches on a guy, when it comes to arm length, it's easier to get into their chest. You can just get right in there. You don't have to go through a guard like you have in boxing. It's a lot easier to get through that guard if you're significantly longer. So having that length matters. And that was why I was wondering, well, are they going to put him inside and then utilize like Turner and Van Ginkel in these 3 edge rusher sets? Well, they did that. And then they brought in Jihad Ward, who's a little bit of a thicker build, a little bit of a thumper. Yep. And they put him inside too. And guess what? Now you have 4 edge rushers, 2 guys who can legitimately play inside on pass rush downs. And then this gives you all this versatility. It gives you the ability with guys like Van Ginkel and Dallas Turner to drop into coverage because they have the athleticism and skill set to do so. Turner was comped by both Brian Flores and Alabama head coach, who just retired, Nick Saban, to former New England Patriots linebacker Dante Hightower. They played the same jack position at Alabama, where you're doing a lot of edge rusher and a lot of like 4-3 linebacker kind of stuff. And he's got the athleticism, speed, and like flexibility in order to like flip his hips and run with running backs. And like going into the draft, I hadn't seen that on film, because like when you're doing what we do, sometimes you just don't have time to watch every single game of every single prospect. But once they come to your team, you kind of dive into more, which is what happened with me. And then I saw him flip the hips against Tennessee. I'm like, oh, okay, now this pick makes a lot more sense, because he's got that element of versatility to him. And you have Van Ginkel, who has legit played 4-3 linebacker. He did so at Wisconsin, and he did some of that inside linebacker stuff for the Dolphins as well, while being an edge rusher. So you have that kind of versatility there. Pat Jones, like he's more of like a traditional defensive end, but you can kick him inside and you can do all these things. Jones had 2 sacks on his own, and Vikings defense ended with 26 pressures on 50 dropbacks per Pro Football Focus. Tremendous numbers. Grenard had 5 of them. Didn't get a sack. Sacks are a 100% outcome pressure. Pressures matter, and they're more predictive week over week than sacks. Because remember, DJ Wanham had that like 8.5 sack season. What were like 5 of them unblocked? That kind of metric just isn't sustainable. But if you can continuously generate pressure, that is. And the Vikings were able to do that with this package. And one of the elements that we haven't really talked about yet, if you have speed on the inside, that helps with stunts. And the looper is the guy who runs around. So one guy crashes and holds like a double team. The other guy runs around. Well, would you rather have Harrison Phillips or Jonathan Bullard run around, or Dallas Turner? I'll tell you who I'd want to be the looper. Dallas Turner, because that speed and quickness is an element that you just can't get from your standard defensive tackle. Yeah, you have freakazoids like Aaron Donald, who reportedly played like 255 pounds because he's just an absolute freak. Complimentary, of course. Just he's a special human you'll never see again in the NFL. Absolutely special. But you have that kind of speed, it can do a lot of things for you.
Let me ask you this. Is this package that you're talking about, is this something that is, you said it's like the pressure and stuff and whatnot maybe isn't sustainable week to week, but like, is the package something that they're going to be rolling out every single week, or is this just the Giants are the Giants? And so they were able to generate these types of pressures, whereas maybe next week, the 49ers, they're going to have to flip it up, or they're just going to go back to the same whole, let's keep running this package. Let's, as just kind of the NASCAR on steroids, let's get these guys in on Brock Purdy and really make him feel that pressure.
So that's a really good question. And I'm going to be 100% honest. I don't have an answer for you. I don't know, because I think a lot of how you're going to utilize this group of defensive linemen and edge players is going to be so dependent on who they're playing. So dependent on, hey, is this guy, like, is this team going to be really run heavy? You know, the Vikings needed to have a lot of speed and contain with Daniel Jones. They needed to play Jones in a similar manner to Lamar Jackson. Now, let's not get it twisted. Daniel Jones is not Lamar Jackson.
I think that's the first time he's ever been compared to Lamar Jackson in his career.
It's a conceptual idea of you have to keep this guy contained in the pocket. Otherwise, he will gash you for 10 yards a bit constantly throughout the game. Mm-hmm. You have to play contained while also getting pressure. And that kind of conceptual idea, I think, is one of the reasons why they also had a lot of speed on that defensive line, why they used a lot of the 4 edge rusher package. Plus, they weren't scared of Devin Singletary running the ball. Now you come to the San Francisco 49ers. If Christian McCaffrey doesn't play, well, that's a big question mark right now. Adam Schefter said just before we started recording this show that McCaffrey may miss week 2 against the Minnesota Vikings. That would be huge, because while you don't need to be a great running back to run in Kyle Shanahan's system, it does take it to a whole nother level, which is why the 49ers offense was so successful last year. So they may want to have bigger bodies in there. They may want to have guys who are more run stuffers. So you may see more snaps from Jonathan Bullard. Taki Taimani in his NFL debut had 10 snaps. Maybe they have Levi Drake Rodriguez active specifically to just have more bodies, big bodies in the trenches, because you're facing a run-oriented team. So I think they'll use this regularly throughout the season. I think it's going to vary how often they use it based on personnel and play style.
And you're basically talking about something that we've discussed on our various Score North PD shows now for a while, and it's this. Vikings defense made a very impressive improvement under Flores in year one. I think we all agree. They tailed off at the end, but they had some guys hurt. Some of their strategies, I think showed up on tape enough. So, but until December, that defense played well, and they certainly were not the colossal embarrassment that the Donatel defense in 2022 was. But Forno, you're talking about the most important thing to me, which is this. The 2024 Vikings defense has the personnel that Brian Flores wants now. Like he did a lot. He tried to do a lot of things with guys and that weren't necessarily his type of guys. And he did a hell of a job. But look at this now. Like the poster child for this entire conversation, as far as I'm concerned, is the edge room. The edge room, I mean, Danielle Hunter's a hell of a player. And I will never say, oh, I'm glad he's gone. Okay. But that room was Danielle, who couldn't do everything Flores wanted, but the one thing he did do well, he did really well. So no one complained about him. But the rest of that room, Tyler, the rest of that room really, really lacked. Like if you look now, look at the size, look at what Brian Flores deems to be important there. It's the ability to zone blitz. It's the ability to drop guys back. It's the ability to have quicker guys. And so I would say this. Yeah, the Giants suck. I'll start there. But number one, the Vikings blew them out. That was impressive. The Vikings hadn't blown a team out like that since 2019, and they did it on the road. Second of all, I think what we saw was a taste of what happens when Brian Flores sort of gets his personnel in place to match his scheme. Because if you guys recall, a year ago, he was doing a lot of very creative things, but probably not his first choice, i.e. blitzing a ton all the time. So I think you're just talking about one piece, and it's super intriguing to talk about just one piece of what Brian Flores now can do. And a year ago, he just simply didn't have the personnel to do the things that we're going to see now. And I do think Sunday, in my opinion, tip of the iceberg.
Yeah. I mean, I think personnel preferences and stylistically is really, really important here.
Yep.
Danielle Hunter is a worse fit for this defense than Jonathan Grenard. And I think Grenard is going to be more successful with the Vikings under Brian Flores than Danielle Hunter because of the fit. Grenard is not more talented than Danielle Hunter. In a vacuum, he is not a better player than Danielle Hunter. Danielle Hunter will be better than Jonathan Grenard was in Houston, and Grenard will be better than Danielle Hunter was in Minnesota with their current defensive coordinators because of the schemes that they run. Grenard is built for what the Vikings are trying to do. Hunter is built for what the Texans are trying to do. And having that kind of swap, I think, is going to be hugely beneficial for both players. You'd love to have Hunter still in the building. Hunter's a very, 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 very good player. But sometimes you have to take a little bit of sacrifice in talent so you can have that kind of fit. And I think that's what the Vikings are doing. It's not because you have a player who's just bad in Grenard. Grenard is very good, but he's not the type of player Danielle is. And I think he's just a notch below, which is fine because now you have a better fit. Fit matters a lot.
Yes. And name me the last Vikings player who you think could have made the play that Andrew Van Ginkel made on the pick six yesterday. And I'll say this, and I believe that you were there as well. The night practice at TCO, Van Ginkel made the exact same play on a Darnold pass. And it is the lack of time that you have to make that play and to not just break up the pass. We've seen 1,000 balls like that batted down, but to catch the ball and have your wits about you to then run. I was trying to think, who was the last Vikings defender? I mean, they've had guys, but it's been a while since you had that type of hand-eye coordination from a guy who wasn't playing on the back end. That's a hell of a play.
This is going to sound a little weird, but I could see Brian Robinson making that play. Just with the stylistically the player he was.
It's just the speed of what he's done. And I've seen it twice now, so it's not a fluke. Like at times it's a fluke, right? The ball ends up in my breadbasket and I just run with it. but like this is he knows what he's doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
he does.
PBU ordinarily. That's not a pick and a pick six. So, okay. The second thing.
Hold one thing, Judd, before we move on.
Yeah. Talk to me.
Next Gen Stats times all these plays. That was the fastest interception at 1.16 seconds over the last 2 seasons.
Wow.
You know what or interception record he beat? His own. Where he 1.26 seconds against Sam Howell in week 13 last year. Yep. Judd, it was the same play.
Yeah, so it's not a fluke.
It's not a fluke. This is becoming a trend. You can't expect this to happen every single year. You can't expect it to happen a couple times a year or every week. But what you can expect is, hey, if this player is doing this, I can potentially see that moving forward. Yes. And I can potentially see this guy making this type of play more often.
Yes, especially like in a big game. Now, he did say post-game, it was Vic Fangio in Fangio's season last year as the Dolphins DC who tipped him off on like the tells or how to do it. He, of course, did not go into chapter and verse for competitive reasons about the subject. But he said, Fangio gave me like the secret to that. But I'm sorry, that is still some hellacious, fantastic hand-eye coordination to make that play. So the second thing is, and this was a gorgeous play, talk to me about the Jalen Nailor touchdown pass that started with some trickery with Justin Jefferson that took the Giants defense and had them essentially looking at a guy standing in the flat while Nailor ran past everybody and caught a nice pass from Sam Darnold.
Yeah, this was awesome.
That was a nice design.
I actually had a flashback because I think the Packers ran this exact same play on Friday night. And this is a concept and stylistically what you would see in the college game a lot. The whole idea in college football is you have to maximize spacing because spacing is so much different there than in the NFL because the hashes are twice as wide. And the athletes aren't nearly what they are either. So you have a lot of different things that you can do. And the NFL adapts some of those concepts because it can work within the confines of the NFL game and with NFL athletes. They don't take everything. And I think that's really important. And you'd be like, well, why would they take from college? It's like a subpar version of football. Technically, yeah. And college football is not as good in a practicality standpoint as the NFL because the NFL has much better players. And theoretically, you have smarter personnel and coaches, which is not always the case. So when you take stuff from somebody else, you have to adapt it to the modern game. And Andy Reid has taken stuff from the wing T offense from like the 30s and 40s and used it in the Super Bowl. So you can take stuff and modernize it and really make things impactful. And one of the things that they did here was they took a play conceptually from college and used it. A lot of times colleges will use like jet motion, which, you know, a jet sweep, they're running like right behind the quarterback or right in front of him in a shotgun. This is orbit motion. And the reason why it's called an orbit motion, it's almost like the arc that they have, they're orbiting around the football, where if you were to continue on that track, they'd make one circle, just like the Earth does around the sun. So Jefferson lines up in the backfield, does an orbit motion off to the far side of the field. And on the far side, you have Addison as your X in the far outside and Nailor in the slot. So what they do is a switch release. And a switch release is very simple. They're going to switch paths. So in theory, if each guy is going straight, Nailor goes into Addison's path, Addison goes into Nailor's. And it's a very common concept. And Addison runs a post. And that post is going to occupy that deep safety. And this is a very important part. So when you have Jefferson or orbit motion, it's like a fake screen. Darnold kind of does a little shoulder fake pump. And Nailor fakes the block because the guy who's actually going to guard him is behind the guy on the line of scrimmage. The guy like that Nailor's in front of, his responsibility is Justin Jefferson. So faking that block is really important here because all of a sudden the guy behind him starts to crash a little bit. Okay, my guy is blocking, so now I can go fill in and make the play. But Nailor fakes it and slides out, and it's just a wheel route for an easy touchdown. And the reason it's an easy touchdown is because of Addison. They ran a lot of cover two. So there's what's called the honey hole, where if you have in cover two, you have the shallow defender.
It's a family show. Be careful.
Maybe PG-13 for this episode.
Yeah.
You have
earmuffs.
You have the flat defender, who's the corner, and then you have the deep defender, the safety. That hole right there, Michael Penix Jr. at Washington hit a bunch of hole shots. If you have a strong arm, and once they get past that flat defender, you can just fire a piss missile, and it's an easy pitch and catch. But because Addison runs a post, and the safety initially sees that block up front, the safety follows Addison, making it wide open in the corner of the end zone for a touchdown. Like it's just awesome stuff. It's creative, it's smart, it's using your personnel in a very wise manner and piecing together just an easy touchdown. Because if you can make it easy, that's how you win football games. That kind of strategy sets someone like Kevin O'Connell apart from other play callers and offensive coordinators in the league.
Yep.
Do you think it has something to do with, like you mentioned the personnel, but like the personnel out there, it almost says, hey, the spotlight, we are absolutely going to Justin Jefferson here because he is leaps and miles talent-wise above some of the other guys on the field. Does that tell you, hey, does that add to maybe the to your point, like selling the block for Nailor before slipping out? Does that sell to, all right, well, they're not going to throw to this guy and this guy because they don't trust their hands. Justin Jefferson is the highest skilled player on the field right now. Does that add to that at all, Tyler? Or is that just me kind of looking for something where it isn't?
I think you have to kind of look back at the Randy Moss days and the gravitational pull somebody like Jefferson's going to have. I think it says less about what Nailor and Addison are and just more about the gravitational pull of Justin Jefferson. Jefferson is just on a different level than everybody else. And because he's on a different level, that gravitational pull matters a lot. And people are going to think twice. And if you think on defense, you lose. You don't think on defense. You have to react. Because if you're thinking, it's already past you. You can't think. You think pre-snap, you react post-snap. And if you have to think post-snap, it's over. So having a guy like Jefferson with that kind of gravitational pull, that's why this was as impactful as it was. Because if you're using Brandon Powell, I don't think that's nearly as impactful as what Jefferson was. So I do think you're onto something there.
Yeah, and the Giants bit, but I mean, the play design on that was gorgeous. I want to go back to what I thought was, now that's up there, of course. So, but here's what I thought was one of the most underrated O'Connell calls. And by the way, it's one game, but I swear to God, I saw a maturation in KO, the play caller, on Sunday. And it's probably because he had a blank slate. Like he could tell Darnold to go jump in the ocean and Sam's going to have to do it. With Kirk, there were checks and balances in what could Kirk do? What did Kirk want to do? You know, with Sam, it's like, I am here to save your career. But I want to talk about a play. So first drive, ugly, right? The offensive line struggles. There's not a ton of shame, but Dexter Lawrence basically tosses Ingram aside, sacks Darnold. It ends with a fumble. Sort of felt like, okay, that's not good. Seen this before. Here's my favorite play. The 99-yard, 11-play touchdown drive, which, by the way, to me was clinical. Great drive. I mean, you don't go 99 yards with a drive like that unless you got your act together. But ball's at the Vikings too still, okay? It's 2nd and 9. So you're like, okay, bit dicey here. And this is after the offensive line in the first drive got off to a bad start, and you're thinking, ooh, the interior again? Really? And O'Connell rolls Darnold away from the pressure in the end zone. Darnold, who I don't think has physical problems, I think his problems in the past have been far more mental, is told roll out. He does, throws a nice pass to Chandler, and it goes from 2nd and 9 at the 2 to 1st and 10 at the 12. Simple play, looked easy, but given what the offensive line had been up against in that first series, rolling Darnold away from the interior pressure and having Chandler, who's, been a project, catch that ball and get that first down. Nice play by Chandler, hell of a play by Darnold, but bravo KO. To me, that was play calling at its finest because it got you out of trouble.
Yeah, I really like that. And that's a similar play to what they usually run at the beginning of games. Like we've seen that play to Josh Oliver 10 times. where they just dump it off to Oliver in the flat and he runs for 10 to 20 yards. And it's just an easy conceptual play that it just springs a guy loose. You can't run it every single time because at a certain point, it's just not going to work.
Right.
But it's a nice go-to, gets you out of trouble. And then right after that, they threw that deep corner out to Jefferson and really sprung him loose on that drive. So
great pass.
Overall, he was really nice as a play caller.
Yep. Really good. All right. It's time for our Purple Daily on Draft. You tell me, Forno, do you want to look ahead or back when it comes to college performances or upcoming performances from prospects that you see as being potentially Vikings one day?
I think we need to, with some of these like Michigan, really keep into perspective what's going on at Michigan. So this past week, they played against Texas and they got their butts whipped. And Quinn Ewers potentially looked like an NFL quarterback. Still has an arm that's kind of akin to like SpongeBob SquarePants' Weenie Hut Jr. Like it just does not have the zip on it. But he looked like an NFL quarterback.
You totally lost me, but it sounded funny, so I laughed.
Judd doesn't get that whatsoever before.
No, I don't, but it's still funny.
That's a 10 out of 10.
That's how you know it's good, when you don't even get the reference and it's still funny.
It's great.
But when you play better competition sometimes, and like Michigan's just not going to be that good of a team this year, don't write off some of these guys yet. I think Kenneth Grant, 350 pounds, and his athleticism is just a bonkers prospect. But he's got to kind of be more consistent. Mason Graham is not quite the athlete, but he's a really good technician, and he can do a lot of things for you. And Will Johnson is most people's number one overall prospect. Don't get bogged down in the results base for the team when looking at these prospects. And I think that can be something where people's brains will go because, if they weren't successful in college, then why are they going to be successful in the NFL? Pat Mahomes, I think, went 5-7 in his junior year of college before he came out. Like, success in college is not always a predictor in the NFL because there's so many other factors that go into it. And just there wasn't a whole lot prospect-wise to really be excited about except Florida's DJ Lagway, the quarterback, who as a true freshman threw for like 450 yards and 4 touchdowns against, Samford. But I don't care. I have something to be excited about as a Florida fan. So I'm going to be excited. But he's not even draft eligible for 3 years. Last week was more about the upsets and more about the pageantry of college football with like Northern Illinois beating Notre Dame.
Oh, God, was that a bad loss for the Irish?
It was such a great win for Northern Illinois, who's actually a pretty good G5 team this year. Yeah. They have real talent. Yeah. Like some guys could play in the NFL kind of talent. So you have that. And overall, it's just more about college football this past week. But just keep an eye on individual performances when it comes to the NFL draft. That matters more than team success.
Explain to me the lens now, because they got absolutely embarrassed by Nebraska. Ryder, be quiet. Dogs are upset. Explain to me the lens now through which we should view Shedeur Sanders at quarterback and a guy that I know that both you and Thor love, Hunter, the wide receiver / corner, probably going to have to choose one in the pros. You've talked about them a lot before, and they're both very good. But like the whole Colorado experience seems to be very odd. And I don't know if it's going to work or not. But much like you just explained about the Michigan kids, how should we view these Colorado stalwarts now that their team is sort of looks to be just not that good potentially?
That's such a tough one. I really.
That's why we got you on the show. That's why it's meat and potatoes.
I don't really have a great answer for you. And the reason I don't have a great answer is one of the reasons why I don't think any of us are going to have a great answer. I think you got to talk with the kids. You got to have a real conversation and get an understanding where their heads are and who they really are as people, because so much of it is the Deion circus. I think it's going to be harder with Shedeur because he's Deion's favorite son. No, not just one of his sons, his favorite. He's told you that before.
Yeah. Doesn't he ranks them like annually or something like that?
He ranks them. He says the rankings can change.
That's true.
Like
maybe it's normal.
Yeah, you know what? Maybe it's normal for parents to have favorites in their head, but 99% of parents that have favorites don't tell their kids, or let alone the national media. But that's what makes this whole Deion experience so, for lack of a better term, fascinating, because it's a circus. And I think Shedeur Sanders is a really good prospect, but how he handles everything and being that his dad is Deion, because it's not like Deion was a failed NFL player. Many consider Deion the best cornerback to ever play football. Like, that is a big factor here because Deion was that kind of player,
Right.
and he has clout in ways that
But if I can stop you,
NFL players. What?
The problem to me, and why I think that you're exactly right, of like getting Shedeur apart from his dad. Deion played a position at which bravado and basically me works. His kid's a quarterback. So like when his kid goes up and essentially says, I got, did you see how much time I had to throw? Which is code for my offensive line sucked. Like, it's one thing if I'm a cornerback and I'm like, this guy, blah, blah, blah. And, I'm a cornerback, but like, I don't think Deion is doing his kid any favors by passing along the same bravado, because as a quarterback, you're going to be seen as, hold on a second. If that's going to be how you are, you probably can't be, X, Y, and Z team are going to say, we don't want that from our quarterback, no matter how talented that person might be. So it's very weird because Deion was great and he's a great quote and was a great quote as a player. But Shedeur has to be careful because like his value is partially going to be wrapped up in his ability to rally the team, not separate the team.
Exactly. There are so many factors with this whole conversation of why it's going to be hard for a lot of us in media without being able to talk directly with sources, and especially the people involved, the Deion and Shedeur, and understand a lot of these interpersonal dynamics, because maybe Shedeur is just being enabled by his dad. Maybe this is just who Shedeur is. Maybe if you separate him, things will be completely different. But if you're an NFL decision maker, are you willing to take the risk that, I can just separate him from his dad and everything's going to be fixed? That's a really tough one to be able to navigate. And the interpersonal dynamics of a locker room and how your team is going to react to somebody are elements that we don't necessarily think about on a regular basis. But when you are Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, that is number one on your mind. You have to be ready for that conversation. You have to be ready to talk about these things and make decisions for your football team based on that. It's going to be a very difficult challenge for general managers to be able to make. And it's not something that anybody in media can say with any form of certainty that it's going to work or not, because the interpersonal dynamics are going to be incredibly difficult. It's like in the world of the NBA, LaMelo and Lonzo Ball with their dad, LeVar Ball, and the big baller brand shoes and all the talk that he had going when these guys were coming into the league. It puts an unfair precedent on these young men that they have to be at a certain point, and their dads are enabling them that they are at this point. Well, LaMelo looks like one of the best young players in the league, and Shedeur might be the best quarterback in this draft, but it's not fair to the kids, and that could be a negative factor. Judd, something that kind of factors in with your generation. Remember Todd Marinovich?
And Marv. His dad, Marv. Crazy.
I don't think the kid had a fried food until he was in college.
He was nuts.
He didn't get to be a kid.
He ruined the kid.
Yeah. Like, the interpersonal dynamics with all of these are going to play a big factor. And I cannot tell you which way. Nobody can tell you which way these things will go. They can warn you. They can be like, I think if this happens, this will be okay. But it's all conjecture and all speculation. And that needs to be taken into account.
Exactly right. Good stuff. All right, AJ, X's and O's, PD, meat and potatoes. Let's get to the questions for our guy, Forno.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you do have one, make sure to leave a comment down below here on YouTube or send your email to pdmeatandpotatoes@gmail.com. We'll have to maybe coordinate this another time because it's actually very funny how naturally the two questions I have for Forner today got worked into. So we've kind of already covered them. So Forner, I'm going to spin them a little bit here on the fly. Still the same realm, but for the most part.
Age is professional.
Very professional.
Yeah.
Going back to that Van Ginkel pick six, Trade is emailing in and he wants to know, one, it looks so easy. And we've already kind of talked about how he's had that in the past. They've had the same play at the night practice. But when it comes to just keeping Daniel Jones contained in the pocket, he wants to know will that same type of personnel maybe, because he felt that with the history of Daniel Jones, you've seen him kind of tag the Vikings for 10, 15 yards. Daniel Jones, but prior to his injury, you've seen him run. They kept him very contained in the pocket, but let's flip it. A quarterback that maybe doesn't have the type of legs. It's not a Lamar Jackson. It's not a Daniel Jones. It's not somebody who can kind of improvise like that and does have to stay in the pocket. Does that personnel change for the Vikings? I know you kind of hinted earlier, like maybe they activate a Levi Drake Rodriguez instead, and maybe somebody else comes out. But like, what does the personnel look like that if somebody has just cement feet in the pocket?
That's a good question. I think a lot of it's going to have to do with the running game, because Brock Purdy is capable enough operating outside of structure and creating. He's actually better than I think some will give him credit for. Like, I was so low on Brock Purdy coming out of college. It took me a long time to come around and realize, hey, that, you know what, this guy's a capable NFL quarterback. And I think a lot of people had the same thing because of Brock Purdy experience at Iowa State. Oh, buddy, don't go back and look if you want to understand what the Brock Purdy today is, because it's night and day. But there's so many layering factors. What's the offensive line look like? And what does the running game look like? How dynamic is the running game? What kind of creativity does the offensive coordinator have to be able to compensate for, like you said, those cement feet? And I think we saw those cement feet from Kirk Cousins this past week. That guy couldn't move with the Atlanta Falcons.
He shouldn't be playing.
That would be my guess too.
Right now.
Yeah.
His Achilles is not right yet.
No. There's so many factors with that, AJ. I don't really have a great answer. It's going to be situational based on those pieces. And if you have a guy with cement feet, if you push the pocket forward, then you'll be able to make the most impact. But we don't really have the guys to continuously push the pocket forward. So I think that Hawk package might actually be utilized a little bit more. Everything's going to be on a game plan basis for that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Next one here. Lucas writes in, hey guys, I'm a Vikings fan stationed out in New York. I was at the Meadowlands on Sunday for the game, and the Nailor touchdown left me in awe. I went back and found some footage after the game when I got home, and he kind of saw a breakdown of the overheads. He goes, 1, I noticed that Johnny Munt was wide open. Is that a design or a flaw in the defense by the Giants? And 2, can we expect more trickeration by Kevin O'Connell here as the season rolls on? Kind of asking, is that the only one that he wants to break out here in week 1? Or do you think there's, half a dozen, a full dozen that he can break out maybe week to week as the season progresses?
So it's not really a trick play. It's just utilizing deception and utilizing your players in proper context. Munt getting wide open, I think it is a product of that. And he's an outlet, because you can tell he goes to block first and then leaks out. Mm-hmm. He is not the main target. He is not the in like the true progression. It is, I want to hit Nailor. If Nailor's not there, I bailed on Munt. That's kind of how I saw it when I looked at it. Now Munt's open, sure, but he's not the main target. He's not part of the play, right, in the sense that I don't want to have to go to him. I want to hit Nailor in the hole, right, and that's it. That's what the play is designed for. That's why I have this built out. And you also have another outlet. You can just whip it over to Jefferson and hey, get 3 yards. But Munt getting wide open, I think, is just a product of the Giants. Really, if you watch it, their communication is going bonkers. They don't really know what to do with Jefferson in the backfield or motioning.
Yeah.
That's your point about they're thinking too much. They're not reacting.
Right.
Yeah. Don't think. If you have to think, it's over.
Yeah. So there was actually a very brief mention of this in the broadcast on Fox on Sunday that was intriguing. And O'Connell, I guess, told them this in the production meeting on Saturday, but he has not talked about this with us yet. And I'm curious to get a response at some point. He told Vilma and Albert that until Hawkinson gets back, Nailor is basically going to play that role. So he's going to get the receptions there. It's not going to be Munt. What's your interpretation of that? And it was just one sentence, it was a throwaway. But I mean, as a Vikings follower, it's extremely intriguing. Forno, what's your interpretation of what that means? Because obviously we're talking about, in one hand, a big tight end that can catch, and Jalen, who is called Speedy and who is not a big guy, but he is a wide receiver.
I think that just tells you they just have plans for Nailor. They believe that he can do a lot of things. And remember, he comes from the world of Sean McVay, where you have 3 wide receivers all the time. And that gives you the ability to do a lot of things. Well, they had Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods, who were excellent blockers. And then you just replace Robert Woods with Puka Nacua, who is also an excellent blocker. And then that gives you advantages because they can block like tight ends, but they're wide receivers. So I think the idea of trying to get Nailor more involved in the absence of Hawkinson is more about Nailor than it is about the tight ends. And they believe that he can be this next level kind of player that truly can break out and be a field stretcher. This team does not have a field stretcher. Jefferson can go deep. Addison can go deep.
Yep.
They are not field stretchers in the same type of way that a speedster is. And I think that's what you have conceptually with Nailor. And by having that, I think it can open up stuff in a different way for guys like Addison and Jefferson.
Interesting stuff. Yeah. And you're right. And if Nailor can, I'll say it for the 1,000th time, stay on the field, he is a talented player. Like he is good. He is a legit, he is one of the few saving graces of the terrible 22 draft because he's a 6th round pick. Mm-hmm. And yes, if you have a star receiver, he's probably going to go in the 1st round, but that's a weird position at which you can find guys. Stephon Diggs, 5th round, Jalen, 6th round. Great stuff, man. We will be back next week. AJ, Forno, and Judd. If this wasn't enough meat and potatoes for you, we'll give you even more next week after the Niners game.